What are the podcasts that you're part of? What is your level of consumption of information? How much time are you spending reading Facebook, Instagram, music, versus how much time are you learning and pushing yourself and learning new things? That's one of the key values of the organization. What do you know? What don't you know? What do you need to know? How much time are you spending finding out more information from places on those things that you need to know? But really the core engine of EO is a thing called forum. And the way forum works is about 6 to 8 people in your chapter meet once a month religiously. People plan their weddings and their children's birthdays and anniversary parties and travel around the world based on this. You don't miss forum ever. And it's about 6 to 8 people in which you have about 5 minutes a month to share what's going on in your life. And then 1 or 2 people have deeper presentation moments. They can share a little bit more about what's going on and share some of the challenges. And in all these 3 areas. So in your personal life, in your family life, in your business development life, and the idea that's really core to where EO comes from is the fact that if you're going to succeed in business, and in general, if you're going to succeed at the work you do, you're going to have to also succeed in how you manage yourself and develop yourself, and you're going to have to also manage and succeed at how you manage your family. The structure of how this thing works is what is so super unique, and we'll try to dip in a little bit to some of this today. One of the most important aspects is a thing called Gestalt Mindset. When we share what's going on in our lives, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the last month. One of the first rules is that there's no judgment. Nobody has anything good or bad to say about what you've said about what's going on in your world. It's a space where we listen and we support each other. So, for example, if I've been having a challenge with one of my family members, and you're in my forum, and for the last few months we've been talking about this, and I tell you, I had a wonderful conversation with my mother. We finally went out for tea, and we talked about the issues, and it's cleared everything up. You can't in your feedback say, that's so wonderful, I'm so happy to hear that you've progressed to that space, because that's a judgment. It's a positive judgment. So we leave that space open. The second thing is that it's 1 bazillion% confidential. The stuff that happens in that environment doesn't leave ever. For example, if 3 people are in forum together and one person shares something that happened in forum, the other 2 people don't get to talk about that somewhere else. It's not that they know this information and it's confidential, so that they keep it confidential, they get to talk about it somewhere else. It doesn't belong to them. The information that you get in forum does not belong to you. You're there to support each other by the fact that you understand something about what's going on in life, and that you can empathize, and primarily the way that you do that support is by sharing through personal experience. And often what we do is we give people advice based on stuff we don't really know, because we're not actually in their shoes. So someone, a friend, a colleague, will come and tell us something's going on, and we'll tell them what often, one of my favorite lines at the moment is that wisdom is knowing what other people need to do. Enlightenment is knowing what you need to do. So we're all very wise. It's very easy to know what other people need to do. And this forum experience is all based around what you share as your own personal experience. So somebody might say, I'm having a really big problem at work. I have a financial manager who doesn't share information with me. It makes me feel controlled. I don't really know what's happening in my business. There's this, and I don't have that experience. But I have that experience with my uncle. I have a relative who makes me feel that way. So I might share that. I might say, when you speak, what comes up for me is this other experience, and this is how I dealt with it. I had this conversation, I didn't do this, I did that. And what we really rely on is the fact that everybody has enough intelligence, enough insight to reach into your story and pick out what's relevant for them. If you think something in your experience relates to something that they need to hear, and you're vulnerable and share what's going on in your space, they'll get what they need to get without you having to take a step beyond what you actually know. So that's the structure. As I said, EO is for people who are running businesses that do $1 million and up a year in revenue. And EO also has a program for accelerators. And accelerators start at $250,000 in revenue up to $1 million. And this program is really structured on scaling up. And that's what we're going to talk about today. A piece out of the EO accelerator program around scaling your business. And scaling is a very particular thing. It's a very difficult thing. It's easy to grow a little bit. It's not easy. It's easier to grow a little bit than it is to really push your business through scaling. And there's structures that are required in order to do that. And one of the EO founders a gentleman named Vern Harnish, who studied Rockefeller. We'll come back to Rockefeller, published a book called Scaling Up, and that's the textbook. That's the basis of what EO is, Accelerate is all about. These are some of the stats. 61 operating programs in 21 countries. This 16% is a really significant number of people that go through the accelerator program and go past $1 million. And that's because of this. So in 1983, 1984, when EO was established, about 4% of all businesses in the US were doing more than $1 million in revenue. Today, that number's still the same. That $1 million revenue mark is still about 4% of businesses that get past that number, and then about 0.4 businesses get to the 10 million, and 0.04 get to the 100 million. That's the curve of what it takes to build a business of that size. And in Accelerator, we have about a 16% success rate. So basically, in Accelerator, you have about a 4%, you have about a 4 times more likely chance of moving from less than $1 million to past $1 million. These are some of the key questions that you might ask yourself or understand about what's going on. And really, I think one of the key things for those entrepreneurs in the room, you'll know, of people running organizations in leadership, which is why you're here, it's a very lonely path. There's not a lot of people that you can share what's going on. If you're lucky enough to have a person, a wife, a husband, a partner who's also in business, who also understands some of these things, some of that stuff can be shared. But often, even that first relationship, if they're not in that environment, they don't need to understand that you're worried about whether you're going to make payroll this week, this month, some of the challenges that you're having. Some of those things aren't appropriate to bring into all of your different relationships. And that's really what this does. It gives you a community. And these are the pieces of what Accelerator is all about. So Accelerator is based on 3 pieces. There's the curriculum, which I've spoken about, and we're about to dive into that. Accelerator also has a thing called accountability groups, very similar to Forum, but much less focused on your personal and family development, much more focused on your business. How are we going to scale you past $1 million? And then once you get into EO, we'll spend more time looking at you holistically in your personal development, your family development, as well as your business. And then obviously mentorship is a very big piece of how we do that. So the scaling up process has got 4 main categories. So the way that the program works is that we have accountability groups once a month where we get together with other accelerators to talk about what's going on in our businesses and to support each other. We have mentorship, which however that works, that's less defined. Maybe once a month you get together with your mentor, who would be a member in the EO chapter where the accelerators are. And then most importantly is this curriculum. So we go through these 4 things: people, strategy, execution, and cash. And today I'm going to be talking primarily around strategy and execution, and a little bit later today around people. And these are some of the key questions. So are all stakeholders, employees happy and engaged in the business? And this key question, would you rehire all of the people that you're working with if you could start again? You can think about all the people in your team, all the people that you work with. Would you pick them all again? From a strategy perspective, does everybody in the organization have a sense of exactly where the business is going, what the key direction of the business is? And then execution. So I have a 4-year-old who in our family has coined the phrase drama head. I don't know where she got that from. I think I might have said, what's all the drama about? And so now we've got this thing saying, why are you being a drama head? And this is one of the key questions. What is the level of drama in your business and organization? How efficiently are these wheels turning? And then for the entrepreneurs in the room, you'll understand that there's a very big difference between profit and cash. This is often a hard lesson to learn. It takes us a long time to realize profit divided by time is actually the cash that we have. And that calculation, for some reason, seems to be really complex to land. So my story, I run a business called the Open Door Agency, Toda. I'm based in Cape Town in South Africa. I came through the accelerator program in Johannesburg. I spent 2 years over there. I graduated into EO and then had a horrendous year last year. The business half died. Thankfully, things are going well again. And the business that I run is a facilitation business. It's kind of like a brokerage. I help entrepreneurs connect to investment, and I help entrepreneurs, where I'm really focused is entrepreneurs and enterprise. So the business is focused on the idea that in South Africa it's very hard to get venture capital. Even the people who say they're providing venture capital aren't really, it's not really, venture capital means you have an idea and you haven't proved it, and the investors are saying, we think you're such rock stars, you're going to beat the market. In our world, which I'm sure is similar to most places if you're not in Silicon Valley, the investors want to see your traction and what your sales are and where you're going before money comes in. And so my business is predicated on the idea that as hard as it is to get an investor is as hard as it is to close a really big corporate transaction. And if you close a corporate transaction that owns your customers, then you're already in sales. So that's what we focus on. This is what I was asked to speak about today. As you can see, it's quite wide-ranging. So it's your competitive advantage, but it's goal setting, effective planning, execution, and then for you to be able to leave with an action plan. So without further ado, here we go to achieve all of those things in the next 20 minutes. All right, so that's the introduction, done, and we're on time. So now what I'm going to ask all of you to do, because we're going to start to share a little bit of information between each other, and again, if this isn't going to work for you, then you don't have to participate, but that means you shouldn't stay. I'm going to ask everybody at once, and we'll count it in to say, I honor the group, and I honor the confidentiality of the group. And what that means is that we're going to turn to each other and share one or two things about what's going on in our businesses or our lives for the next few minutes as we talk about some of these ideas. And that whatever you discuss with whoever's around you, that you accept that that information does not belong to you. You're going to learn something, you're going to get an opportunity to share what's going on in your process, but that what you hear now for the next 20 minutes from anybody else in the room doesn't belong to you. Is that okay? Can we do that? Okay, cool. So on three, if everybody can say, I honor the group and I honor the confidentiality of the group. 1, 2, 3. I honor the group and I honor the confidentiality of the group. Cool. All right, so let's go. So what was so fascinating about this guy is that he did that equivalent of all of those people that we regard as the wealthiest people today with 80,000 staff, with no email and no WhatsApp. So just think about that for a second, what it means to communicate with an organization and to make the wheels of something like that work with that kind of team without any communication tools. And that's going to take us on to looking in a little bit more detail at these. So I don't know how many people have read this book, have come across these guys, Jock and Liff. These guys were Navy SEALs in the US Army in about 2006 in Iraq. They came back from that environment and developed a couple of different business tools that they learned from that environment and applied them to business. So they explain that when you're walking down the road, and to give you a sense, just a quick sense of what a Navy SEAL looks like, it costs about $250,000 to train an American soldier. It costs about $6 or $7 million to train a Navy SEAL. They, like professional sports people, they train for a lot longer than they serve. So like a professional sports person who trains all the time and plays a game for a very small amount of time, these guys train for something like 18 months before they go and do their first 6-month tour. And to give you a ratio, an infantry unit of about 5,000 people would be matched with a team of these guys that are 16. And they have a really interesting culture, which is that everybody's a leader and everybody's a follower. And the way that you know the leader in your team of 16 is the person who knows the answer next. That's who's in charge. So it's really fascinating. There's a lot of companies that are studying this. I mean, Google and all of these guys want to understand how to create new things. And one of the main things, so these guys, I don't know how many of you know the training that these guys go through. Treading water for a day in freezing ocean, being on the sand and having to crawl and have sand in your pants and not eat. And then the commanders are standing on the side with blankets and hot chocolate and saying, don't worry, if you need to come out of the ocean, it's fine. They filter through. The people who join this program are like Olympic athletes. People who've won gold medals in the Olympics want to become Navy SEALs and don't make it. And what they're actually filtering for in this big macho process is the ability to look after the next person. That's what they're actually filtering for. That when you're in the water all day in freezing cold, that what you don't become about is survival for yourself, because you won't survive. But if you become about the person next to you, then you survive. And because they have to learn to get into a kind of a group. So when these guys go in, they go into a compound. They're looking for somebody that they're trying to capture. There's women and children and other people. There's different buildings. There's guards with guns. They don't have time to look in a direction twice to decide if the space is safe. So two people go in. One looks this way. One looks that way. They both have to enter that state of mind to be able to operate like that and to check the next space. So what they're actually filtering for is an ability for people to move into this group mind and collaborate together. And that's so those kinds of things is how they've developed these business principles. One of the first principles on the Rockefeller Habits is, what is the health of your executive team? If you think about what is the health of your executive team? The people that you work most closely with. Jock explained, if you're walking down the road in a war zone and suddenly you come under fire from an automatic weapon, he said, imagine somebody with a massive sledgehammer smashing the wall in front of you, something like 1,700 times a minute. Your team behind you are are coming under fire. They have a process in training for months and months where they practice pointing their gun at the sky for 1 second, just to give the commander that muscle reflex to think for 1 second before he tells his team what to do, and then they've trained enough, he makes a decision and they follow what they're going to do. And in the Q&A, somebody said to him, it's easy for you to talk about this stuff. When you're coming under fire and your life is threatened, you can have all of these fantastic processes. You're trying to save the world. We're running businesses, it's normal day. I've got a partner who I don't really like. It's not the same thing. He said, when you come under fire and that chaos, the kinetic energy is coming at you, the only thing, you're not thinking, what is this about? Who am I saving? What is the political situation? What is the bigger mission? The only thing you're thinking about is, how do I get this person next to me home? And that was one of the biggest things that I took away from this. I was in quite a conflicted business situation at the time. And one of the key learnings was that you only really know what's going on when you're under pressure. So you've got a partner, you're working on a project, you only know how that person's going to perform when the shit hits the fan. So these are the couple of different, and that goes to, so I don't know if you can see it, but there are a couple of, there are 10 different Rockefeller habits. We'll look at them in a little bit more detail shortly. But the first thing is your executive team. What is the level of, camaraderie, engagement, support from your executive team? And there are a whole bunch of other things that we'll get into, but if that isn't working, you're nowhere. That's basically, all of these things can be played with. The only thing that can't be played with is that very first one. This is the topic that I was asked to speak on, and there are a number of different tools in the Rockefeller Habits, in scaling up, related to finding these competitive advantages. I'm sure you've been through them. They're long processes. And I want to focus slightly sideways of things like, what is your key metric? What is your number one goal? Where are you going? What are your core values? I imagine that everybody in the room has looked at those at some point. And this is from the strategy block. I think, interestingly, so there's people, execution, strategy, and cash, and everybody is strong and weak at different things. So I'm particularly, strategy is one of my favorite areas, and so that's sort of why it's the least interesting to me in the learning process. And execution for me is one of my hardest things. I'm a strategist, I'm off in the clouds, I love meeting new clients, I love new things, I love finding new opportunities. The systems of every single day arriving and making sure that your whole team follows exactly what the plan is of where you're at and what you're trying to achieve is a whole nother science. And I'm putting all of these things up, although we don't have time to get into them, to encourage you and to share with you to go and have a look at this. You can join Accelerator, you can join EO, but you can also go and buy the book and work through it in your own programs or your own businesses. But one of the biggest learnings, I think reading a number of different business books, is the idea that leadership prioritizes. And the process is of consistently prioritizing if you're trying to lead an organization somewhere. Just less than a year ago, my father passed away. In my tradition, we take off a week and sit still. People come into the house and share all the stories of the person that's passed. You learn lots of things about the person that you didn't know. And in that time, I sort of stopped working. So I kind of took a week off. I didn't really answer any emails, one or two really important things I had to answer. And I suddenly noticed that the same amount of things were not working out. The same amount of things didn't happen, and the same amount of things did happen. And I had a whole eureka moment around what prioritization is and how many times in my world I chase the next lottery ticket. An opportunity comes in, I think, oh, this is going to be the most amazing thing. Let me go spend time here. When really it may be, but it probably won't be. And that skill of being able to find your priorities. I don't know if you've seen that video with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett talking about Warren Buffett's diary. Have you seen this? So Warren Buffett has something like 2 or 3 meetings a week. His diary is completely empty. So there's this kind of meme catchphrase at the moment, which is busy is the new stupid. This idea that the more full your diary is, the more busy you are, the more you're running and the more chasing, the more successful. If you're working 22 hours a day, you're a rock star. Like literally one of the biggest rock stars in the world doesn't have anything going on. He wakes up in the morning, he reads. I think he still buys McDonald's, which I don't understand every day. And this just goes to the question of prioritization. So I wanted to just take a second and if you could just turn to the person next to you. One of the key things in this program and what we're going to talk about now, finding this competitive advantage, doing things differently, what I'd like to share in the next 20 minutes that we have is really a focus on execution. This point. So this is a gentleman named Andrew Valentine. He started a business in London in 2004 called Streetcar, which he then sold to Zipcar in 2010, which you probably all know. A very successful entrepreneur. He just came to our program in Cape Town a few weeks ago and shared a whole bunch of ideas. We just had the execution block. And this key thing that he shared, which is that you do need to go and develop your unique proposition. You do need to understand what's different about you. You need to understand why your values are special. You need to get everybody in your team aligned around those things. You need to have a big vision for where you're going to be in 25 years. You need to have broken that down into the next 3 years, this year. You need to know what this quarter needs to achieve, and we'll look at that in a second. But what you actually have to do is do it. What you actually have to do is have a system to get your whole team to execute on that. So, if you could take a second and turn to the next person, I'd like you just to think a little bit in terms of quarters, because that's one of the key models of how this works. I don't know if this is a fact. Maybe David, maybe you know. I don't know if Rockefeller invented the quarterly reporting. No, they had it before that. It's possible. But Rockefeller started a process of every 13 weeks looking at what you're doing, quarterly reporting. It feels like modern economics reports quarterly from about that time. So I'm not an economic historian, I don't know if it's a fact, but certainly one of the things we learned from that time is this refreshing, and I'm coming back to this idea of prioritization. How often do you relook at your priorities? How often do you relook at how much time you have to spend with your kids, how much time you have to spend with work, how much time you have to spend with yourself? Maybe it's going to change now, maybe it's Christmas, maybe it's Easter, maybe it's Ramadan, maybe this quarter requires different priorities from you than last quarter. Can you see that just picking what you think is, my family is really important, time with my kids is really important, executing on these business deals is really important, but actually it's a constant process. The world is pushing back on your ability to execute at that. So if you can think back to the beginning of the year, it's a little bit more than 90 days just to get your head in that space and think about and just share for the next 2 or 3 minutes, what was the most successful or biggest highlight that you'd like to share with the person next to you that happened since January 1st, 2019? And what is the biggest challenge or biggest obstacle that's standing in your way since the beginning of the year? What's on your mind? Cool. So just for the next 2 minutes, you just turn to the person next to you or the next 2 people next to you and just share What is your biggest win? What is the thing that's happened in the last since 100 days, since the beginning of the year, that you look back and think, amazing, I could have patted myself better on the back for that, and what is the obstacle that's in your way? That's kind of the thing that's happening in the last 100 days. Cool, that'd be great. Cool, is there anybody that feels like volunteering? Is there anybody that feels like voluntolding other people? It is confidential, we don't have to share it with the whole room. Feels like people are chatting. Okay. Have both people had a chance to share? If you both haven't shared, please swap. Workshop means you're going shopping, you're going to get some work. Okay. So the flywheel in accelerator and in scaling up works like this. People are the key engine of what we need. In order to do things well, we need good people. So the first thing that we need to do is find the right people. With the right people, with the right brains around the table, we can develop the right strategy. With the right strategy, we can then execute that strategy well. That generates more money. With more money, we hire better people, develop a better strategy, execute better, and so the flywheel continues. Today we're going to take an angle on competitive advantage, which strictly fits into strategy and into how you understand what's unique about your value proposition, but to talk about how you actually become better at what you're doing by executing better. And there's three key areas. The one is priorities. We've had a short conversation about priorities. The other one is, as we say in my country, data, or in other parts of the world, data, and meeting rhythms. Meeting rhythms, really, if there's one thing that I would say, if you want to take one thing from this conversation, and here's the advert. If there's one thing to take from what we're talking about today, take meeting rhythms. We'll get there in a second. So looking at the Rockefeller Habits around prioritization, the first thing is the executive team healthy and aligned? Does everybody in your executive team understand the differences between each other and why it's valuable that those differences exist? What the different styles are of leadership in the executive team, and what different people in that team's priorities are in order to move the business forward. Does your executive team meet regularly to review strategy? How often as an executive team do you meet? And the answer is it should be weekly. So if you and your business partners, you and your executive team are not meet, so this again comes to this question of prioritization. Things don't just fall into place because once a year you decided where you were going to go, or because once upon a time you decided what the values of your organization were, or because you know who your core customer is or what you're trying to deliver. Once a week, the executive need to get together and say, right now, on the current circumstances, how are we getting there? And is everyone else in your team aligned around these priorities? What I really wanted to have there's many things around data. I think we often don't take data collection, data reading, refinement in our businesses seriously enough. We think we know what's going on. These 4 questions are a remarkably powerful and simple conversation to have with customers, stakeholders, employees. How are you doing? What is going on in your industry or neighborhood? What do you hear about our competitors? And how are we doing? When was the last time you went to some of your best customers and had a conversation like this? Where you sat down with some of your best customers or your primary funders, and probably do that more often with funders, you know, your primary, the people that you're delivering your services to, that you sat down with them and said, how are you doing? What else is going on in our world? What else is going on in your world with other suppliers like us? What is going on with our competitors? You'll be fascinated with the level of information and data you get on your business out of having a simple conversation. And it's stuff you obviously know, but you'd be fascinated at what comes out from implementing this. And then finally, meeting rhythms. Businesses, how many of you have got stand-up meetings every morning? How many people know about the stand-up meeting process every morning? So the idea is that within some kind of executive team, and then it breaks down into other teams, that every single day, different companies have got different tricks for it. Some people have their meeting at 7 minutes past 9, because you can't be late for 7 minutes past 9, but you can be late for 9 o'clock. If there's a meeting at 9 o'clock, you can be there at 5 past 9, but if there's a meeting at 9:07, you can't be there at 9:09. 9:07 is where it starts. It's a very short meeting. It's a 10 to 15 minute stand-up. It's not a sit-down. You go around the room and you talk about what's working, what isn't working, what are people working on today, and where are they blocked. You don't get into unpacking what's not working. You don't get into why it's not. You hear, this is what's not working for you, and who else in the team can help you. You can go and talk about that afterwards. It gives everybody a sense of what's going on in the team. It gives everybody an update of where we're going, and it also highlights when people aren't doing stuff. If you've had the same problem for 3 days in a row, then something's not working. Somebody else has to get involved. So just taking these three areas into mind, your prioritization, data and how you collect data, and your meeting rhythms. If you could maybe just turn and talk to the person that you've been chatting to and just unpack this a little bit further. How often do you work on your priorities? Do you have strategy meetings with your executive? What of these three things do you think are the most important to implement right now in your business life or in your organization? Are there any takeouts that you could take out of this stuff, these key execution pieces, and the very surface level that we've discussed it on today, that you think is obvious, that is a takeaway that you can see how that would implement, how that would affect your business? So you just take a few minutes just to share with the people next to you what of this is the most interesting or take-homeable. I think you'll be surprised when you actually say it out loud. Cool. So I'm going to ask if there's anyone in the room who'd like to share a little bit. There'll be a roving mic. If anybody feels like they'd like to share something that they've shared with the person next to them, or what they've learned, or what they thought was interesting. We've got someone over here. People have stuff to say. They always have stuff to say. They just need to be picked on.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Benga from Nigeria. I have an online platform where we connect citizens with decision makers. And I have a small team of 4, and we have meetings on Mondays. So we resume typically by 8:30, usually before that time. But Mondays by 9 a.m., we have weekly meetings. So we talk about financials, we talk about what we did the previous week, what we're doing this week, And generally, we discuss the direction where the company is going. And of course, if there are issues, we raise them during our AOB sessions. Yes, and I think the sessions are usually very useful because sometimes it is those meetings that lead up to maybe a major decision or an unexpected insight. So those weekly meetings are really very important. Thank you very much.
Hello, Noor Alawi from An-Nada. On Sundays, 11 a.m., we have our weekly meetings, and usually it's the most of the staff or the department heads, and then we address our priorities. So we have a list for the weekly meeting, and then we actually use a program called Depulse. Sorry, it's Monday.com right now, and for project management, and every person is assigned for a certain topic, and they would have to discuss, okay, so what happened in regards to this project? And if there's an issue, we address it right away because we're all sitting in a circle. And so it's kind of the huddle that you're talking about, but it takes about an hour for us on Sunday. And then because we use Depulse, right away in the meeting, we're uploading documents, we're addressing things. So, and if somebody is not performing, we can tell because the issues are being addressed again and again. And you can actually tell from that, using that software or that this technology, that who looked at your new pulse and what's going on right away in your business. So
Cool, thank you.
thank you.
So while we're going to the next person, I think just to share one other thing, I think one of the fascinating tools in this space, and I don't know how many people use this, but a thing called start, stop, continue. So those are things that new things we'd like to start, things we'd like to stop, and things we'd like to continue. And the instruction that every manager in the business should have that conversation with everybody that reports to them at least quarterly. In fact, you'll be surprised if you do that in your primary relationships and other relationships. If on a quarterly basis with your husband or wife, you have a conversation about what should we start, what should we stop, and what should we continue. It's a very simple, very quick way to have that kind of individual feedback loop with the people in your organization.
Hi, we've tried some daily meetings and weekly meetings, but what we also realize that there's a lot of redundancy which happens with that. So it's the same thing being conversed and no action being followed up. And any thoughts on that? How do we remove that redundancy part of?
How often do you meet? How long do you meet for daily? How many people are on your team?
So the sales team are state-wise. So each state would have 7-8 people in a state. In a state, there would be 8 people. Right. So we've converted that to monthly meetings and setting up targets. And so there are weekly follow-ups, but that's not in a form of a meeting. That's just sending reports. And
are the sales team on the road, or do they see each other? Do they go into the office every day?
No, they are all on their own on different districts.
So, I mean, I think one of the interesting things when that happens is how do you use technology for a very quick conversation? How do you use technology for 10 minutes a day for people to get on a Skype call or on a Zoom call for 10 minutes a day to see each other? There's some fascinating new tools and rules about how you meet in technology. So for example, one of the things I learned recently is that if you're doing a video call, everybody on the call needs to be on video. So if you do it usually, if you have a dispersed team, and you're on video, it shouldn't be that some people are in the room together and somebody else is on video, because then there's body language cues and other things that happen between those people that are in the room. But if everybody's sitting at their desk or wherever they are on video, then everybody relates the same way, and they have to fill in those cues by saying something else. So I think that there are ways to use technology. You obviously have to look at a meeting rhythm that works for you. But and again, there'll be a difference between your sales team and your executive team. And there are different redundancies. There is redundancy if you do the same thing. So you have to create slightly different things. There's a 10-15 minute daily meeting. It's not an hour. It's a very short meeting. It just says, this is what I'm doing. This is where I'm stuck. This is what I want to achieve by the end of the day. In fact, I mean, how many people do that for themselves on a daily basis? That when you get up in the morning, you know, these are the main things I need to achieve today. There's a technique called the 5 priorities of before you go to bed, before you close your laptop at the end of the day, that you write down what are the 5 main things I need to get done tomorrow? Because there's so much stuff that's going to come at you that isn't those 5 things, and you may not do all of those 5 things, but getting up in the morning and having that list of those, so in a way, that very short meeting at the beginning that just says, what is the main thing I'm going to achieve today? And especially in sales, it's super, super powerful if those groups of people are saying to each other, because the next day they need to say if they did it or they didn't do it. And as you know, sales at a week's break is not sales. I think we're out of time. Any more questions? One more question. I think 2 more minutes? 2 more minutes? Anybody else? This is all known. Okay. I think we're good.
Can you tell us more about the 2 guys, about the combat? Sorry. Can you tell us more about the strategies of the 2 guys from the SEALs or from the combat experience?
These guys. Sure.
It looked interesting.
So I think the first, and I've 60 seconds. I think the first thing is just the speed of operation. I think cover and move, which is that they provide fire cover for each other and they get to the next place where they take space. We spoke, doing things super simply is a key thing, but decentralized command, which is what I'll close with, from Andrew as well, is this idea of standing orders. Napoleon, who was the most successful conqueror, conquered the space that he did on one principle, which was standing orders. Standing orders are you get to a particular place and this is what you do. Decentralized command. So for example, what Jaco and Liv spoke about is that they would have a process where in the areas that they were in, a lot of the buildings would have flat roofs. And they would be told that they have to go and set up camp on top of a particular roof. And if your team is stuck on that and they don't understand, so they would get to that environment, and if it was a not safe environment, they would have to come up with a different answer. They couldn't get there and they couldn't say, because they would die if they didn't think differently. If they got to the place and the rule was, when you get into an environment, go on top of the building, set up camp with a viewpoint on top of the roof, and the answer was, that's not going to work, then they would find another answer. And being able to give your team that decentralized command, that ability to have a key order, a standing order, and then know how to implement it at a different place. I think, and maybe just to finish, I think one of the other really powerful things that happened is they spoke about how at the end of every mission, at the end of every day, they would come back absolutely exhausted. They might have been out for 18 hours. They're dirty. They're emotionally drained. They've come under fire. They've nearly died. Maybe somebody did die. People have been injured, and they would straight away get into a feedback room for 30 minutes. Talk about what worked, what didn't work. There's no ego, no pointing fingers. Something didn't work. There was a reason it didn't work. And I think that's another piece of that with your team is how quickly do you learn from each other? How quickly do you get back? And without pointing fingers, are you able to say, that worked and that didn't work, let's do this thing differently. Extreme ownership. That's the name of the book. All right. Is there okay, cool. Yes, so just to conclude, if there's anybody from Bahrain here who's connected to entrepreneurs, there is, in the $250,000 to $1 million revenue space, there is an accelerator program in Bahrain. If you think that anybody would be appropriate or to join the EO Accelerator program, please let us know. Everybody who's sitting over here are EO members and are all available to answer more questions about the organization and about Accelerator. So please do come and chat to anybody who's here if you want to know more about EO, about Accelerator, and about the program in Bahrain too. Thank you very much.